Welcome this morning. We're looking at Matthew chapter 5, verse 27 down through verse 30. Matthew chapter 5. We want to begin reading at verse 25. He says, "And you have heard that it was said to those of old, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I say to you, that whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has committed adultery already with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, pluck it out and cast it from you, for it is more profitable for you that one of your members perish than your whole body be cast into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cast it from you, for it is more profitable for you that one of your members perish than your whole body be cast into hell." Let's bow in prayer. You're amazing, Jesus, and we appreciate the time we've had together this morning just to look you in the face and tell you how great you are and how we feel about you, and as one body with one voice to just express from the deep internal of our being our praise and how worthy and how much you are beyond what we can imagine, and yet you have come indeed in the night hours and have whispered in our ear and gripped our hearts and give us longings for yourself. And we come this morning with those longings. We haven't come sloppy. We haven't come just off the cuff. We haven't come just to be coming. We've come with anxiousness. We've come with desire. We've come with anticipation. We've come with openness. We've come with a real desire that you would take us to a new level of intimacy with yourself and each other. We've come because we want to stretch. We've come because we want truth. We want to know you. So may your word on us and draw us to you and reveal itself to us. And may we know you and each other in a different and better way because of that. We're open to you today. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Amen. We're working on a premise. The Sermon on the Mount, of course, has a basic premise. And everything he's doing in the three chapters 5, 6, and 7, all revolve around this premise. And the premise, of course, is basic. It starts out in the very first verse. He doesn't wait till the end of the Sermon on the Mount or the middle of it. He doesn't build up to it. It's just right straight out. And the premise is this: you are absolutely poor in spirit. So that there's this helplessness idea. And it's not kind of helpless. It's not helpless in some areas, but not others. It's, no, you have your strong points, but it's not that. You're totally helpless. Absolutely helpless in spirit. You have no resource whatsoever. You're stripped down. You are, and again, it's the strongest Greek word for poverty-stricken. So you have absolutely no resource whatsoever. But this poverty, helplessness, you're not that way because you've sinned. You're that way because God created you that way. He intends for you to be that way. You were built to be that. And He wants to come in His overwhelming resource and fill your helplessness. The trigger that sets all that loose is the mourning. You are to mourn, which is the second beatitude. And the mourning idea is you are to grip your helplessness, embrace your helplessness, like you would embrace the loss of the closest loved one you have. That just literally breaks your heart and so tears you up inside that you just give emotional response to it. It's uncontrollable. You are just gripped by it. That's the way I want you to embrace your helplessness. So embrace your helplessness, and He will come in His overwhelming resource, and He will fill you with His Spirit. And out of that will spill all of these things. Now, as He begins to develop that, He comes to say, I want you to have a righteousness, therefore, that exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees. We look at Him and say, hey, how could that possibly be? We could never pull that off. And indeed, that is right, because we're helpless, and we must be filled. And in that filling, He is going to take us to a whole new level. So we're moving into a whole new way of thinking. We're moving into a whole new way of operation. We're not approaching things as we have before. This is a brand new deal. It's the new covenant deal of the fullness of the Spirit. and He is filling us, supplying, and bringing us to a new level of living. And I know that's somewhat confusing, but let me give you some illustrations. And He gave us 6 illustrations. He started with the illustration of murder and said, hey, here's the murder, but the problem really isn't murder. But the old said, hey, I can't control my emotions. I can't help the way I feel. But listen, we got to put a lid on it. Go too far. Let's make a rule. And of course, the rule was found in the 10 Commandments. You shall not murder. But they misinterpreted what God meant by that and said, well, hey, we'll just use it as a lid and don't go beyond murder. Hate, anger, upset, despise, don't like, wish you weren't here, wish you were dead, all of that is okay, but just put a lid on it. I didn't kill him, so I'm okay. Jesus said, new level. Not a new rule, new level. Not a new rule. Not, well, the old rule was don't kill, the new rule is don't hate. This is not a new rule. This is a change in your nature so that what you are at your next door neighbor differently than you did before. And what was looking at him with the perspective of hate, despise, you're in my territory, get out of my face, wish you'd drop dead, all of that attitude suddenly is replaced with, wow, I love the guy, I wish the best for him, I wish I could help, I want to help, I'll roll up my sleeves and wash his feet. Well, how am I going to pull that off? Well, you're not. Why? Because you're helpless. See, that's the premise. You're helpless. And when you're filled with yourself, you cannot possibly get that done. The best you can do is have a new rule. But this is not a rule. This is a change in nature until I look at you and see you different than I did before. And so it went over so well, he said, let me give you a second illustration. And he moves us to this sexuality deal. Now, the sexuality concept, which is verse 27, which we read, down through verse 30. The sexuality concept is that sexuality is interesting. They had a major problem with sexuality in their day. All the way from women being abused to women were just an instrument. They couldn't vote. They didn't have any right. They didn't have any voice in the courts. They were nothing. They were instruments. They were tools. They couldn't be disciples. There were no women disciples. We'll not get into that. So here, it was that whole deal. It was a man's world. Women were looked down on, uneducated, that whole scene. Divorce, they didn't get that figured out. 2 camps, arguing about that all the time. When you can, when you can't, what is right, what is wrong. Just the whole deal. 2,000 years ago, they had that problem. Here we are, 2,000 years later, and we haven't gotten any better in the realm of sexuality. We're still arguing. In fact, in some ways, we've gotten worse. Women can vote. That's good. And there is a certain amount of equality, much better than it was. That's good. But now we're into same-sex marriage. Now we're into, wow, what can I say? Have we improved? No, we still got major, major problems in sexuality. Well, Jesus is trying to solve the problem of sexuality. No, he's not. He's trying to solve the problem of murder. No, he's not. Because you see, the problem is not murder, and the problem is not sexuality. The problem is the heart and the nature. So if nobody ever killed anybody ever again, we wouldn't say, yay, we made progress. No, we didn't. And if there was no sexuality and no divorce and no abuse and no in sexuality, we'd say, yeah, we made progress. No, we haven't. Because the problem isn't, do you see that? That's not the problem. That's not the issue. The issue is, this helplessness, and will I embrace it and allow him to fill me? See, the problem is in the nature that views this. So Jesus is attacking this idea of sexuality and the nature of it. Now, that becomes very clear in verse 28. He turns and says, now in verse 27, he says, those of old. Now, those of old viewed their sexuality and said, well, it's a body drive. He pushed it over in a corner and said, hey, the best we can do is put a lid on it. cap it off, keep boundaries around it. Hey, I have a sexual drive with sexual thoughts and sexual desires, and it's an appetite that needs to be satisfied. But it needs to be curbed. Yeah, needs to be some limitations to it. So what's the limitation? 10 Commandments. 7th commandment. Do not commit adultery. So, don't sleep with my brother's wife. Everything else is fair game. That's the rule. So I applaud myself because I haven't ever slept with my brother's wife. And I feel good about myself. Jesus says, verse, but I say to you. Now that is a really important statement. I just want to spend a moment to communicate to you. I say to you. The I say is there twice. That is, the I is there twice. In the original language, the word ego, E-G-O, which is the word I, is stated. And it's also stated in the verb, which is say. And normally, in a normal sentence, it would just be the verb say, which has the I at the end of it, in the word itself. But Jesus put it there twice. So it literally could be translated, I say to you. So he's speaking out of an authority base. Oh, you say, he's speaking out of the authority base of the fact he's God. No, that's not what he's doing. He is God, but that's not the authority base he's speaking out of. He's speaking out of the authority base of, I am the one who has fulfilled the Scriptures. That's verse 17. I didn't come to destroy, I came to fulfill. And I am a man who popped out of his mother's womb, absolutely helpless, just like you. I'm the second member of the Trinity. I got that. I leaped off my throne and set aside everything I had as God and became a helpless babe in a woman's womb and popped out of her womb absolutely helpless, just like you, and was filled with the Spirit. And I am the first man in the new covenant, in the new realm of living, in my helplessness, operating out of the power of the Spirit. And from that position that have fulfilled the law and the prophets, I want to say to you, this can be done. Don't look at the one who's stating this and saying, oh, yeah, well, you can, I can't. No, I don't have anything you can't have. I'm not anywhere you can't be. So what I am, you can be. And I'm expecting it of you if you're going to be in the new covenant. So I am saying to you, as a spirit-sourced man, he says, you have the possibility of the accomplishment of this new level of living. Did you get that? This is not beyond you. Why? You're helpless, but if you're resourced with him, what could you be? How could you live? What are the possibilities? Well, I can't. I know. Why? You're helpless. We got that. So you don't need to say, I can't. You don't need to say, well, I'm not able to. You don't need to say, well, I've never been. We all know that. We know that. Why? Because we're the same way. We're helpless. But what are the possibilities? Jesus says, I'll tell you what the possibilities are. I say to you. And then he springs forth with this statement. Whoever looks at a woman to lust for her. Whoever looks. And he brings up the whole subject of sexuality. Now, the old-timer, again, in the Old Covenant, he took the law and said, that's going to be the boundary, the cap. Might have a sexual drive, put it over here in a corner, put the boundaries around it, don't go beyond these boundaries. It's the best I can do. Jesus says, I'm not giving you a new rule. See, the old rule of the Old Covenant was, do not commit adultery. The new rule of the New Covenant is, don't look at women. Well, good luck on that one. How are you not going to look at women? The minute I look at you, I recognize your sexuality. I see you as masculine. I see you as feminine. I can't look at you without that. And the minute I look at you, I identify, masculine, or identify feminine. There's some that I can't figure out. But that's beside the point. That's masculinity, femininity. I get that. So the rule is not don't look at women. That's it. No. See, he's not giving us a new rule. This is not a new rule. Replacing the old rule. Because that would be a rule of absolute impossibility. So he says, I'm not giving you a new rule. Do not look at women. He moves on in the verse. Do you see it? I say to you that whoever looks at a woman to lust for her. Oh, now we've gone from looking to motive and intent of look. Nod your heads. Now we've gone to what's inside that causes you to see what you see. Now we've gone to nature, which is the whole point of what he's saying. That the big deal here is not the issue of sexuality. The big deal here is the issue of your nature. What you are within. Well, I'm trying to curb. No. Deal with what you are here. Well, I got to get it. No. Well, I'm trying not to be on pornography. I'm trying not to be on online. No. You got to deal with what's in here. Well, I'm trying to stay away from the bookstore. No, it's what's in here. Well, I'm trying. I wear blinders. Got them off of a horse. Oh, no, it's what's in here that controls what you see and how you view what you see. But it's your issue. Now, Genesis gives us insight into this. In fact, if you go back to the, you all know, hey, Adam and Eve are here, and they entered into sin and picked of the fruit and entered into sin in the fall. And the whole deal was you can be like God, and so they ate. And interesting what happened. It says in Genesis 3:7, it says, as a direct result of that, this is the first result given to us over the issue of the first sin. Then the eyes of both of them were opened. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? That what they saw changed. You mean they didn't see before? Well, obviously they did. They'd been looking, seeing, looking at each other, looking at all of nature, looking at everything around them. It wasn't that they were blind up to this time, but it says then their eyes, obviously he's saying that sin took place, and because sin took place, something happened in their view and the way they saw things. And then he develops it further in that same verse, 3:7, and says, then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they knew they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves covering. Well, they'd never seen that before. Why did they see it now? Why is that the first result of what's going on in sin? A shame and naked. Why is that? Why are they suddenly aware? What has happened to their sexuality that never was in their view before? Something has taken place. And then in verse 10 of that same chapter, it says, God is on the scene. He's come to walk with them in the cool of the day. And finally, they hid, of course, and finally he traced them down. And it says, Adam responded, I heard your voice in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked and I hid myself. And God looked at him and said in verse 11, who told you you were naked? Where'd you get that idea? You've never had that idea before, but you got that idea now. Where did that come from? Oh, they have sinned. And the way they view things has changed. See, this is not an issue of, well, yeah, God has forgiven. Well, that's good. This is not, God could come down to Adam and Eve, pat them on the head and say, I forgive you. Listen, hey, you picked the fruit, shouldn't have run a good tree. But listen, I'll recreate the fruit, stick it back on, and we'll act like it didn't happen. That's not the case here. Why? Because man isn't what he was. He's had a radical change in his nature. And his nature, the way that causes how he sees things, has altered. And if there's going to be redemption, there's going to have to be a radical internal change at the core nature of the individual. That's this passage. I want to try to develop that for you, if you'll walk with me. And I want to give you a progressive idea and take you step by step through it. Number one, purpose. Purpose. I never saw this before. I admit that. Looked at this lots of times, but never saw this before. But in the creation story, there is a progression. And I really want you to get this. There is progression going on in the progression story. God, in 6 days creates everything that is. On the last day, which is the sixth day, He creates man. The way He created man, according to the passage, is He got off His throne, came down, got His fingers in the dirt. Did you know you're dirt? Got His fingers in dirt and formed. He never did that on any of the other creation. Animals, plants, all that. But man, you have His fingerprints on you, which is phenomenal. It's phenomenal. And He formed man out of the dust of the ground. And then it says, this Genesis 2:8, the Lord planted a garden outside in Eden, and eastward in Eden, and there He put man whom He had formed. So here's the whole creation out there in this beautiful garden that God has created. And guess what's in the garden? The animals and all the plant life, and it's full of sexuality. Masculinity, femininity, masculine and feminine are everywhere in the garden. The plant life is that way. Everything He created in nature is that way. All the animals are male and female. I mean, it's everywhere. And He's made man no sexuality. And planted it in this garden and said, hey, handle it. I'm going to fill you with my Spirit. I'm indwelling you. That's the way man was created, to be filled with God. So here He is, filled with God, filled with the Spirit, in the garden, and He's naming the animals. He's handled. How long was He there that way? We have no idea. 6 months, a year, 5 years, 50 years? No idea. Doesn't matter. But here He is, handling the whole garden, which is full of sexuality, but not Him. He has no sexuality. And God came along in chapter 2, verse 18, and said, not good. Isn't that interesting? After all the other creation, God said, good. 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 Now He's man, put him in the garden, and he has all this sexuality, and He looks at man and says, not good. Now, I'm not saying God said I messed up. I think He had a plan all the time. I think He was teaching man something. So I don't think, God made a mistake. I'll correct that. Don't think that. So what did God do? Now realize, man has been alone all this time. Note the progression. Come on, follow this. Note the progression. Man's been alone all this time, and there's been sexuality all around him. In all the animals, all the plant, everything he handles is sexuality, has sexuality in it, but not him. And God says, not good. Not good at all. Not good. So what does God do? God says in verse 28, or verse 18, chapter 2, verse 18, it is not good that man should be alone. I will make him a helper. A helper? Oh, thank God I'm going to have a slave. No. You know what the word helper is? The word helper is the same word that Jesus used for the Holy Spirit in John 14. Of how the Holy Spirit come alongside and empower you helpless people. Isn't that an interesting concept? That there's something not good here. Sexuality everywhere, but not in man. Something not right here. Something not good. And I'm going to create for man a helper comparable whatever he is, she will be. Wherever he stands, she will stand. Whatever status he has, she will have. Comparable, not a slave to, not a tool of, not an instrument, not a pleasure item, not somebody to be used, but a helper comparable, equal to him. Just really disappointed in you. I thought there'd be thousands of amens coming up. It's okay. Just absorb. So, what did he do? Now, you getting the progression? Creates everything that he is. Creates man, handles him, fingerprints, whole deal. Forms him, dust of the ground. Puts him in the garden. Man is living by himself. Sexuality everywhere. Not for man. God comes along and looks at man and says, not good. What I did for all the other creation, I haven't done for man. Not good. And so what does he do? This is so phenomenal. Verse 21 and 22 of chapter 2 of Genesis. And the Lord caused a deep sleep to fall on Adam, and he slept. And he took one of his ribs, this phenomenal picture, and closed up the flesh in its place. Then the rib which the Lord God had taken from man, he made into a woman and brought her to man. Got the progression? God made everything that is, sexuality everywhere, and every item that he created makes man no sexuality. Puts him over all the garden, comes along and says, not good, not good, not good. Puts the old bull to sleep. Doesn't get into the ground. Doesn't go to the dirt. Goes to the inside core of man. And out of who man is, creates a whole nother being. Helper comparable to. And brings her to him. And you know what man's response was? He broke into this statement. It's in verse 23. Look at this thing. In verse 23, Genesis 2:23, it says, man says, this is now bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man. Now the word translated in the Hebrew language for bone there, wow, it literally means self. It's the idea of substance, the substance of self. In other words, and it's literally saying, this is self of self. You know what man is saying? Adam looks at this woman that he's just laid eyes on for the first time and says, she's me. That's me. He didn't say, who are you? He didn't say, where did you come from? He said, that's me. She's me. Because she literally was him. And you know, you got the progression? God created everything that is. Made man out of dust of the ground. Stuck him in the garden, take over. Fill you with the Spirit and you can take over. lived that way. Everything had sexuality in it. All the animals, all the nature, everything. Not man. God comes along and says, not good. Not good. Not good. Puts the old boy asleep. Takes a rib. And out of man creates this woman. And when man sees her, he says, that's me! And the very next verse in the book of Genesis, after that statement of Adam, is verse 24. Chapter 2, verse 24. Therefore, and therefore, you know, means what I'm going to say is based upon what I've already said. So out of the statement of man, oh, that's me! She's me! That statement comes this fundamental biblical principle that just flows through the entirety of the Scriptures, yells at you in the New Testament. A man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. Now that's interesting because there weren't any fathers and mothers when that was stated in Genesis. You got Adam and Eve is just saying, she's me! And all of a sudden we're talking about, yeah, when you're a kid, you're going to leave your father and mother and you're going to run off with this gal. Where did that come from? It was a principle of the way this thing was going to operate. It was the purpose of how this whole deal was going to operate. And in Matthew chapter 19, when they wanted to come and discuss and trap Jesus over the issue of divorce, you know what he said? Have you not read that God back in the Old Testament, haven't you read Genesis? These are the guys who are the experts. Haven't you read Genesis? And he quoted this verse to them. A man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And the word joined there literally is glued, welded. Well, how could I not be welded to her? She came out of me. She's me. She is me. So the purpose of the sexuality of our lives was what? Not, well, I got a body drive, needs to be satisfied. Well, put a lid on it, make it a rule. No. The sexuality of my life was what? It was a uniting. It was a joining. It was, she's me kind of deal. It was a oneness. It was, we weren't meant for battle. We weren't meant for hating. We weren't meant for abusing. We weren't meant for separation. We weren't meant to use each other. Well, where did all of that come from? I've got this stinking self-centered nature in me. And when I look at you, I see not me. I see, what can I get? How can I use you? What do I want? What are my desires? What can I make? What's my advantage? My nature is wrong. It's filled with itself. And I love you. Why do I love you? Because you satisfy me. You meet my needs. Got to have somebody take care of my kids. And it's all a self-centered. That's the opposite of the purpose. And the purpose was, oh, she's me. Let me ask you something. What would happen in your relationships, and you'll have to transport this into yourself. If you're married, fine. If you're not, if you're dating, fine. Whatever your relationships are. What would happen if all of a sudden you would push all your desires aside, you would push all of that you want aside, you would push the way you think, what you think is right, how you think things ought to be, all the things, all advantage, you'd take all of that kind of thought process, and you'd push it aside, and you'd have one thought process. How can I pour my life out? can I meet your needs? Because in meeting your needs, I'm meeting my needs because she is me. Well, I'll tell you, brother, I win every argument I've ever had, I've won with my wife. I know that isn't, because when I win, I don't win. What have you won? You haven't built, you've destroyed. Why? Because she's not me. And I've just built walls, and I've divided, and the whole purpose of the sexuality that he's planted within me is destroyed. Let me give you the second step in this concept. First one is, and the rest of them will go really quick. First one is purpose. See, in the sexuality, there is a purpose. Jesus is restating it. The whole thing has to do with nature. And when the nature is off, the purpose is destroyed. So when I'm filled with my self-centeredness, it destroys the purpose, and she's not me. She's not me. So the purpose is oneness. The purpose is uniting. The purpose is one flesh. The purpose is, that's the purpose of sexuality. Now he comes to performance. Because you know that nature always acts. See, whatever you are inside cannot be concealed. It will demonstrate itself in your physical world. So if I'm filled with myself inside, how's it going to respond? How's it going to act? How's it going to play itself out? In self-centered acts that destroy relationships. And I don't need to describe that to you because every one of us know what that's like. And the purpose is destroyed. Now, don't think that that's just the way it is with mankind. This is the nature of God. For instance, God's nature does what? Expresses itself in the physical. That's a Romans 19:20 thing. He said, don't you know, God has revealed himself to everybody. He's revealed himself in two ways, inside and outside. In other words, down inside of man, the revelation of God, and on the outside of man, in the creation of the world, God has expressed his nature in the creation of the world, and the invisible qualities of who God is literally seen in the visible world all around you in creation. Why? Because the nature of God had to give expression in performance, action to himself. Now, go back to our passage. Here's those of old. Those of old said, oh, it's just a body drive. This sexuality, just a body drive. Put it over here, put a lid on it, curb it, keep it within the boundaries of, don't sleep with your brother's wife. Got that done, feel proud of myself. Jesus came along and said, you've missed the whole purpose. The whole purpose is, oh, she is me. Now, how's that going to play out in my actual physical involvement with her? It's interesting, and this won't be new to some of you, but it's interesting. There are 4 words in the Testament for know. Nostos, which is data, information. And there's oida, which is perception, perceiving. And when it comes to she is me concept, nostos is not, yeah, I know that woman. What do you know? Well, I know she has such and such a haircut changes, so I can tell. She has, she is, she does. I know. No, we're not talking that. We're not talking that. So that word is not used. Oida, perception. Yeah, I perceive her. I watch her. I see her. See, that word is not used. The word that's used in relationship to marriage, the most intimate relationship of marriage in the physical, is the word gnosko. Mary, Joseph did not know Mary. That's the word, know. Until she brought forth her firstborn son. Physical, intimate involvement. Know. All wrapped up in know, which is a phenomenal idea, because you see the whole concept of know is not just a physical release, a get over the appetite thing. The whole idea of know is that it's expanding. That I don't perceive everything, but the whole knowing of her gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and greater. And our lives are literally coming together in an expansion of him and her, and she is me, and whoa, the whole thing is. And do you love she is me more than you did 50 years ago? Well, absolutely. Well, do you love her in the way? Probably not. Although, probably I do. But it's at this whole thing is. Did that make any sense to you? So this is to play itself out, physical relationship with each other, where emotionally, mentally, physically, in every way, our lives are literally expanding together. She's me. She is me. So the idea of what he's proposing is that this is not just a new rule in the new covenant. Yeah, don't look at women. Not that. Well, pornography's out. It's not that. It's, the problem is what you see when you look, which comes from nature. So the nature has got to change. Why? Because I am to look at her with the purpose for who she is, the opposite sex for who they are. She is me, and there's to be a uniting and a coming together, and that's to be acted out in the day in and day out operation of my life. Now, it takes us to the third idea, which sets this all off, and it's position. It's really interesting that the word for lust, I say to you that whoever looks at a woman to lust, the Greek word for lust is the same identical word for covet. Isn't that interesting? Really interesting. For instance, in the 10 Commandments, the 7th commandment is, you shall not commit adultery. You know what the last commandment is? 10th one. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, nor her male servant, nor her female servant, nor her ox, nor his ox, nor his donkey, nor anything that is your neighbor's. Covet. Same word as lust. You know what the idea of the word is? It's the idea that I want it. Instead of you having it, I want to have it. Covet, lust, desire that says, instead of you having it, I want to have it. You have a house, I covet your house, meaning I wish you'd die and give it to me in your will. I want to take your house from you. You have the car, I want the car. And I want to take it from you, but I can't, so I won't. But I want to. And if I could, I would, but I can't. Covet. Now bring that into our passage. Jesus says, the older timers said, do not murder. Put a lid on it. All the feelings. But you can't go, you can have all the feelings, but you can't kill. I hate him, but I didn't murder him. I'm angry, but it didn't murder him. Jesus says, I want to tell you, you can't have the feelings. Because anger is spiritual murder. Well, I didn't kill him physically. Right, but you did spiritually. You killed them. You destroyed something in their lives and in your life by the feelings of hatred and the feelings of bitterness and the feelings of anger. You killed something in the spiritual world in your life and in their life. So you murdered them in the spiritual realm. Let me give you another example. Sexuality. Well, I didn't sleep with my brother's wife. Yeah, but we're not talking in that realm. We're talking about in the spiritual realm. You literally stole something from them. I lusted after a woman. I stole something from her that I don't have a right to. Well, I didn't physically. No, but in the spiritual realm. You stole your brother's wife. And there are ramifications to that. In the physical and in the spiritual realm. And I have taken from that woman I don't have a right to. And I have stolen from her. That's what he's saying. Oh, why would anybody do that? Because I'm full of myself. All I think about is me and how I feel and what I want and what I desire. And I'm all wrapped up in my nature that looks through these eyes and says, what can I get for me? And the call of Christianity, folks, in the new covenant is a call of, oh, I am helpless. I can't crawl out of this mess. I can't keep from doing this because I'm so full of myself. Jesus, would you come and would you literally do something in my life in filling me and cleansing me that your nature would become my nature, and instead of destroying in the unseen world, I would build in the unseen world. It's me. You know what Paul said? Love your wife as you love yourself. Why? Because she is me. How do you treat yourself? Oneness. Oneness. I want to ask my wife to come up here. I want to apologize for every time I've used you for self-centered benefit. For every thought that wasn't found in she is me. When I have created division, separation, instead of oneness and unity. And I want to ask you to forgive me. Because in the physical realm and in the spiritual realm, I want the fulfillment of the new covenant. Jesus, I cry out to you today that you would fill us with yourself. How selfish we have been. We have used each other for our own sake and pleasure. How selfish. How selfish. And Lord, the only chance we got out of this, to get out of this, is for you to come and do a deep work in the nature of our lives. And Lord, I can't change my wife or anybody here, but Lord, you could do something in me which might change my wife. She is me. Heads are bowed. Not imposing anything on you. But there may be some husbands and wives that need to kneel or stand before Jesus. And they'll allow something new to happen within them. Would you go further than you've ever gone before? Would you be more open than you've ever been? Would you long for and crave for and maybe you say, well, I'm not married. Well, what about your relationships? What about the way you view things? What about, would you allow him to do something new, draw you to a new level in your sexuality? Moments of seeking. All is open.